I've always felt like the middle child in my family, caught in a shadow that I can't quite escape. I'm Jake, a 21-year-old man, and I have an older sister named Emily, who's 25, and a younger brother, Lucas, who's 19. My relationship with Emily isn't the issue. She's been busy with her own life. Instead, it's Lucas who has always been the favorite, the so-called golden child. My parents have treated him as if he's something special for as long as I can remember, and I've often felt like I'm stuck in the background. This feeling of being overlooked has built up over the years, but it hit a breaking point during Lucas's recent birthday. To understand why, I have to take you back to my own birthday, the day I turned 21. People often talk about this milestone as a major life event, but for me, it was anything but celebratory. I was working on my birthday, and when I got home, I found no party, no gifts, not even a simple happy birthday from my parents. I spent that evening alone, scrolling through social media, watching my friends post pictures of their vibrant birthday celebrations. I wondered if my parents had simply forgotten or if they had plans to celebrate later. But as days passed without any acknowledgement, the reality sank in. They didn't even mention it. And that was the first time I truly understood the disparity in how we were treated. Meanwhile, Lucas's birthdays have always been extravagant affairs. When he turned 16, my parents went all out, renting a restaurant, inviting all his friends, and gifting him a brand new gaming setup. In stark contrast, my 16th birthday was just a quiet dinner at home, and I'd be lucky to receive a gift card. Until recently, I had accepted this as just how things were. However, this year, perhaps because I'm older or because I'm working full-time while Lucas is still in college, the resentment I felt began to intensify. A few days before Lucas's 19th birthday, I overheard my parents discussing some big surprise for him. They were so excited, and I could feel my heart sink as I listened to snippets about making everything perfect. I realized they weren't planning anything even close for me, which only deepened my feelings of worthlessness. It felt like my own birthday wasn't even worth remembering, while it was treated like a major event. When the day of Lucas's birthday arrived, I woke up to the sounds of people setting up in our house. Decorations filled the living room. Balloons floated everywhere, and the smell of catered food wafted in from the kitchen. Family members began to arrive, many of whom I hadn't seen in months, all there to celebrate Lucas. Not a single person asked me how I was, or if I wanted to join in on the festivities. It was as if I were invisible in my own home. For a moment, I considered leaving, but I stayed, driven by a strange urge to see how the day would unfold. Perhaps deep down, I hoped someone would notice me too, but that hope proved futile. The climax of the day came when my parents called everyone into the living room for a surprise. They led Lucas outside, and I was left frozen in place as I watched them unveil a brand new car parked in our driveway, complete with a giant red bow on top. My heart shattered. They hadn't even bothered to give me a card for my birthday, yet here they were, presenting Lucas with a car. I congratulated him, of course, because what else could I do? But inside, I was seething with anger and confusion. Lucas shrugged off the moment as if it were no big deal, but to me, it was monumental. And hearing him downplay it made my feelings of inadequacy only worse. I couldn't shake the nagging sense that I didn't matter as much as he did. As my parents praised Lucas for deserving this grand gesture due to his hard work in school, I felt an overwhelming wave of bitterness wash over me. I had been working full-time, helping contribute to household expenses, and yet I received no acknowledgement of my efforts. Later that night, after the party had ended and the house was quiet, I confronted my parents. I asked them why Lucas received all this special treatment, while they had completely ignored my 21st birthday. Their response was infuriating. They insisted that it was different for Lucas because he was younger and still in school. They said I didn't need celebrations, since I had a job now. Their words stung, as if they were telling me I was no longer worthy of recognition just because I had started working. When I pointed out the consistent favoritism Lucas received over the years, my parents brushed it aside, telling me I was overreacting and that they loved both of us equally. yet their actions screamed otherwise. It wasn't just about the car. It was about years of feeling like I was always in second place. After our conversation, I felt more alone than ever, unsure of who to confide in or how to process this pain. In a moment of desperation, I turned to Reddit, sharing my story to see if anyone else felt this way or if I was simply overreacting. When I posted my story, I didn't expect much. I thought maybe a few people would empathize or share similar experiences. But to my surprise, my post went viral, gaining thousands of upvotes and hundreds of comments in just hours. People from all over shared their own stories, many resonating with the feelings of neglect and favoritism I described. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of validation and community. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Strangers on the internet could see what my family refused to acknowledge: the blatant favoritism toward Lucas. However, the situation took a turn when Lucas found out about my post. I suspect someone from our extended family or one of his friends stumbled upon it and sent it to him. Next thing I knew, Lucas barged into my room, demanding to know why I had put our family's issues out there for the world to see. He seemed less angry and more confused and uncomfortable when he asked me why I didn't just talk to him about how I felt. I struggled to find the right words because, let's be honest, discussing with Lucas how our parents treated him like royalty wasn't likely to change anything. Instead of making a big scene, he simply left the room. I figured he would go straight to our parents, and sure enough, the next morning, they called a family meeting, which I knew was a disaster waiting to happen. We gathered in the living room, my parents on one couch, Lucas quietly sitting in the corner, and me across from them. I could already feel the tension building. They didn't start with apologies or acknowledge that they might have hurt my feelings. Instead, they jumped straight into accusations, claiming I was being dramatic and that I had embarrassed the family by posting our personal issues online. They insisted I had no reason to be upset and accused me of being jealous of Lucas's success in school. I was taken aback. How could they turn this into jealousy? This wasn't about that at all. It was about how they treated me like I didn't exist for years. They dismissed everything I had tried to express, acting as though it wasn't a big deal or, even worse, suggesting I was making it all up in my head. At one point, my dad said, "You're working now. You're an adult. We don't need to baby you anymore," as if that somehow justified ignoring my birthday while rolling out the red carpet for Lucas each year. But this time, I didn't back down. Normally, I would let them steamroll me, but I stood my ground. I told them exactly how I had felt over the years and explained that the birthday situation was just the final straw. I didn't want more stuff or bigger parties. I wanted to feel like I mattered. Of course, they brushed it off again, claiming, "We love both of you equally," but their actions spoke louder than their words. Surprisingly, later that night, Lucas approached me and apologized. He admitted he hadn't realized how much it bothered me, but it felt more like he was saying it out of guilt rather than genuine understanding. I didn't push the issue. At least he tried, which was more than I could say for our parents. However, after that, things between Lucas and me became awkward. We stopped talking as much, and when we did, it felt forced. He kept his distance, and I did too. I started to withdraw from the whole family, opting out of dinner or movie nights. Instead, I focused more on my friends and my job. A couple of weeks after all this happened, I got promoted, a significant achievement for me, but my family barely acknowledged it. My mom said, "Good for you," and my dad asked if I could take on more household bills since I was earning more. No matter what I did, it felt like it didn't matter to them. That's when I realized the situation wouldn't change. I began seriously contemplating moving out. My close friends, who had witnessed the favoritism over the years, encouraged me to distance myself from my family and to focus on my career and happiness rather than constantly seeking validation from my parents. Although it was a tough decision, I knew they were right. Around that time, one of my aunts reached out. She had seen my post on Reddit. How she found it, I have no idea, and mentioned she had noticed how differently my parents treated Lucas. She admitted she hadn't spoken up before to avoid causing trouble, but she wanted me to know that I wasn't imagining things. That acknowledgement from a family member meant a lot. It was one of the first times someone within my family recognized what I had been enduring. This made me reconsider my future. I didn't want to keep living in a household where I felt I was always competing for attention. I started looking at apartments and discussing moving out with friends. I realized it was time to create some distance from the toxic environment at home. I wasn't sure where things would lead, but I knew I needed a change. This was no longer just about escaping favoritism. It was about finding my own path away from the shadow of my brother and my parents' expectations. Eventually, I made the decision to move out. After everything that had transpired, the viral Reddit post, the family meeting, and the realization that nothing was going to change, I knew it was time for me to find a place with a couple of friends. We rented a small apartment together. Packing up my things and leaving was a mix of emotions. On one hand, I felt a sense of freedom, finally distancing myself from the toxicity of my childhood home. On the other hand, it felt bittersweet to leave home behind. Despite the chaos, it was still a significant part of my life. When I told my parents I was moving out, their reactions were barely noticeable. My dad simply said, "Good luck," and my mom gave me a hug, which felt obligatory rather than heartfelt. I expected at least some sign that they would miss me or pretend to care, but their indifference felt crushing, as if I had only mentioned a mundane errand rather than a life-altering decision. Once I settled into my new place, I felt liberated. I no longer had to deal with constant reminders of favoritism, and I wasn't tiptoeing around, trying to avoid arguments or feeling overlooked. My friends were supportive, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had some control over my life. However, that sense of peace didn't last long. About a month after I moved out, I heard about Lucas's apartment situation. He was also getting his own place, but unlike me, he wasn't paying for it. Remember the car my parents gifted him for his birthday? Well, they also provided him with extra cash to help him buy an apartment, and they assisted him in furnishing it, new furniture, appliances, everything. I couldn't help but compare it to my own experience. I had to save for months to afford basic furniture, buying things piece by piece whenever I could, while Lucas received everything on a silver platter. I tried not to let it bother me, but it was impossible. I kept reminding myself that I didn't need their help. My career was flourishing, and I had just received another raise at work. I tried to convince myself that my self-worth wasn't tied to their validation, but the sting of their favoritism still hurt. Even after moving out, my parents continued to act as if everything was perfectly fine. Whenever I brought up the favoritism, they dismissed my feelings, telling me I was being too sensitive or imagining things. They never once admitted that they treated us differently, which was infuriating. No matter how I expressed my feelings, they brushed it off, as if I were the one with the problem. Lucas and I barely spoke after I moved out. His earlier apology felt insincere, and now there was a weird tension whenever we saw each other. He never mentioned the Reddit post again, and our conversations became short and awkward. When Christmas approached, I reached another breaking point. I decided not to attend the family gathering that year because I didn't see the point in subjecting myself to the same old treatment and pretending everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. When I informed my parents of my decision, they labeled me ungrateful and accused me of being selfish for missing a family tradition. But I held firm. I didn't want to endure another holiday feeling invisible. That decision led to another Reddit update, where I shared what had happened since my last post. The move, Lucas's new apartment, the Christmas drama. Once again, the comments flooded in. Many people expressed outrage on my behalf, advising me to go no contact with my family altogether, while others suggested I was being too harsh and should consider forgiving them. The opinions varied, but the general consensus was clear. I needed to keep my distance from them if I wanted any peace in my life. Despite everything, my parents attempted to extend an olive branch for Christmas. They sent me a small gift, cheap and impersonal, feeling more like an obligation than a thoughtful gesture. It was the kind of gift you would give someone you barely knew, not your own son. I was at a loss for how to respond. The experience of feeling misunderstood and uncared for by my family became increasingly difficult to bear. I began to distance myself emotionally, reducing the frequency of my calls and keeping conversations short whenever they reached out to me. This created a widening gap between myself and Lucas, my brother. As time went on, neither of us made any effort to reconnect, and I found that the more space I created between us, the better I felt. It was as if I was finally severing the strings that had kept me tethered to the disappointment and frustration of my childhood. Around that time, a close friend suggested that I try therapy. They believed it could help me unpack some of the resentment I had been carrying for years. Initially, I hadn't considered therapy as a viable option, but the suggestion began to resonate with me. I realized I was holding on to a lot of anger, not just related to recent events, but stemming from my entire childhood experience. The favoritism I had felt growing up wasn't new. It had always been there, but it became glaringly apparent as we matured and faced adult challenges. The tipping point came during a visit to some extended family. I overheard my parents talking animatedly about Lucas and his minor achievement of getting a good grade in a college class. The enthusiasm they displayed was disproportionate, making it feel as if he had just won a prestigious award. In that moment, it struck me that nothing would ever change. I would forever be second in their eyes, regardless of my own accomplishments. This realization solidified my decision to take control of my life and emotions. After this incident, I recognized the urgent need for change, prompting me to seek therapy. With my friend's encouragement, I found a therapist who specialized in family dynamics. This decision turned out to be one of the most beneficial I had ever made. At first, I was uncertain about what therapy would entail. I had never engaged in such a process before and feared it would just involve discussing feelings, something I wasn't eager to do. However, as I attended more sessions, I began to unpack years of pent-up feelings. I explored how I had often felt overlooked, the constant favoritism I faced, and my frustration at never feeling good enough for my parents. My therapist validated my feelings, helping me realize that I was not imagining my experiences or overreacting. I understood that therapy was not about fixing my family, but rather about healing myself. As our sessions progressed, I noticed significant changes in my mindset. I found that I was not as angry as before, and I started to establish boundaries with my parents. When they made passive-aggressive comments or dismissed my concerns, I learned to express my feelings without getting drawn into their emotional manipulation. For the first time, I felt liberated by the idea that I didn't need their approval to feel good about myself. When my parents learned I was in therapy, they reacted negatively. My mom dismissed it as a waste of time and often insisted I should just move on, claiming that they loved both of us equally and that I was exaggerating the situation. My dad showed little concern, merely shrugging off my feelings. However, their reactions no longer impacted me as deeply as they once had. I realized I didn't need to convince them of my truth. I was pursuing therapy for my own well-being. During this period, I unexpectedly met someone named Amelia, a 29-year-old who immediately grasped my situation without needing lengthy explanations about my family dynamics. She listened, offered support, and encouraged me to continue setting boundaries. Our relationship progressed at a comfortable pace, and having someone in my corner who didn't judge my feelings was exactly what I needed. Professionally, my career was on an upward trajectory as well. Shortly after I began therapy, I was offered a promotion that came with a significant pay raise. This new role was based in a city a few hours away from my family, making it an ideal opportunity to further distance myself from my parents while focusing on my career growth. When I shared the news of my promotion with my parents, their reaction was predictably indifferent. My mom offered a casual remark, urging me to visit often, while my dad didn't even look up from his phone. Their lack of interest only reinforced the realization that they would never change. They wouldn't suddenly begin to appreciate my accomplishments or treat me on par with Lucas. As I observed Lucas from a distance, I noted that he was facing his own struggles, dealing with academic difficulties and personal challenges. Our parents, who had always shielded him from the harsh realities of life, could not resolve his problems. I didn't take pleasure in his struggles, but it confirmed for me that no amount of favoritism could adequately prepare him for the complexities of adult life. For the first time, I felt a sense of advantage. My experiences had compelled me to be independent and resourceful, making me more resilient. As I prepared for the move, I began contemplating the possibility of going no contact with my parents. Therapy had helped me understand that their behavior was unlikely to change, and my pursuit of their approval was only causing me further harm. Despite my attempts to communicate my feelings about their favoritism, every conversation ended the same way, with them denying the issue or deflecting blame back onto me. The idea of cutting ties felt drastic initially, but as I reflected on it, it began to feel like a necessary step. Amelia and my friends provided tremendous support throughout this period. They witnessed firsthand the negative impact my relationship with my parents had on me and encouraged me to prioritize my mental health. I realized that I had cultivated a strong support system outside of my family, a group of people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could offer them. This was a type of love and support I had longed for, but never received from my parents. The narrator's journey begins with a realization that they no longer need their parents to feel happy or validated. Before moving to a new city, they decide to have a final conversation with their parents. Not to seek closure, but to express their feelings about the long-standing favoritism that has left them feeling overshadowed by their sibling Lucas. The conversation unfolds as expected. The parents become defensive. The mother reacts with tears, unable to comprehend why the narrator is bringing this up, while the father exhibits annoyance. This response confirms for the narrator that they are unlikely to change their parents' perspectives and, crucially, that they don't need to. After this conversation, they feel a sense of calm and clarity, having expressed their truth. Following this confrontation, the narrator opts for no contact with their parents. There's no dramatic announcement. Instead, they simply stop engaging, not responding to calls or texts. This decision allows them to focus on their new life, embracing their job, nurturing their relationship with Amelia, and prioritizing their emotional well-being. Initially, the transition is challenging, but over time, the narrator feels a significant weight lifted off their shoulders, experiencing newfound freedom. Reflecting on their growth, the narrator recognizes how far they've come from feeling invisible and constantly seeking validation from their parents. They now live life on their own terms, surrounded by people who genuinely care for them. As time passes, the narrator finds that life after cutting ties with their parents is smoother than anticipated. Instead of feeling guilt or regret, they experience liberation. Their career continues to flourish, and their bond with Amelia deepens. Together, they begin discussing their future, imagining the prospect of starting their own family. The idea of creating a loving environment devoid of their parents' favoritism brings them a sense of peace they haven't felt in years. Not long after the narrator goes no contact, Lucas reaches out. This is expected, especially given their unresolved relationship. Lucas is facing difficulties. His academic performance is slipping, and for the first time, he's experiencing challenges that their parents can't solve for him. When they meet, the atmosphere is initially awkward, but Lucas soon opens up in a way the narrator has never witnessed. He admits to struggling not only with school, but also with understanding the impact of their parents' favoritism on both of their lives. This revelation is surreal for the narrator, who had long viewed Lucas as part of the problem. As they talk, it becomes clear that Lucas has also been a victim of their parents' dynamic. He apologizes sincerely, acknowledging how favoritism has damaged their relationship, and this acknowledgement is profound for the narrator. They recognize that their years of conflict stem from a shared upbringing that pitted them against each other, rather than from any inherent rivalry. As they begin to rebuild their relationship, the process is neither easy nor fast, but they make tangible progress. They decide to keep their parents out of this healing process, focusing solely on their relationship as brothers. They start to meet more regularly, sharing their lives and supporting each other in ways they had previously neglected. This new dynamic fosters a sense of brotherhood that transcends their past competition for parental attention. Meanwhile, their parents attempt to reconnect, sending occasional texts and invitations for dinner. The narrator, however, maintains their distance, feeling unready to re-engage with them. They remind themselves that they don't owe their parents anything. This journey is about protecting their own peace. They reinforce their boundaries, a skill they are honing through therapy. Lucas also begins his own journey of personal growth, inspired by their conversations. He starts attending therapy, recognizing that the pressures of being the golden child have affected him too. As he shares insights from his sessions, both brothers gain a deeper understanding of their parents' dynamics, helping them navigate their own feelings and relationships. As the narrator continues to progress in therapy, they experience a breakthrough concerning their self-worth. They realize that their happiness is no longer tied to their parents' approval. For years, they sought validation, believing that if they could earn their parents' admiration, they would feel fulfilled. This realization liberates them. They now recognize that they have built a fulfilling life independent of their family's influence. Discussions with Amelia about starting a family of their own become serious. The narrator, who once feared repeating their parents' mistakes, feels excitement at the prospect of creating a nurturing environment for future children, one filled with love and support. They are determined to ensure their children feel valued unconditionally. Looking back, the narrator finds it remarkable how their perspective has shifted. They have transformed from feeling invisible in their own family to recognizing that they don't need their parents to feel complete. Their relationship with Lucas continues to evolve positively, and they are proud of the strides both have made. While they still work on their bond, their primary focus remains on personal well-being, career growth, and nurturing their relationship with Amelia. Surprisingly, they no longer harbor bitterness toward their parents. Instead, they have released that emotional burden. The goal isn't about forgiving or pretending everything is fine, but about moving forward and not allowing the past to dictate their future. If their parents fail to understand this, it becomes their issue to grapple with. As for Lucas, the narrator is proud of his growth and newfound clarity. Both brothers aim to live their lives free from the expectations and pressures imposed by their parents. With a bright future ahead, the narrator feels genuinely excited about what lies ahead.